Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. Last spring, I accepted a babysitting job on a Friday night for the Davids, a family who lived about 5 blocks from my house in Chandler, Arizona. I was 17 and saving money to pay community college tuition, so the $20 an hour felt like an excellent opportunity. The neighborhood radiated calm, single-story homes, well-kept lawns, and streetlights spaced every 30 meters. My parents, noticing how safe the area seemed, gave their approval. I arrived at 6:30 p.m. Mrs. David showed me how to use the alarm panel, gave me the Wi-Fi password, and a list with emergency numbers. Then she put Sybil, 4, and Tyler, 6, into their pajamas before leaving some leftover chicken nuggets in the refrigerator. Mr. David reminded me that bedtime was exactly 8:30. Shortly after, they left for a charity dinner downtown. As soon as they closed the front door, I slid the safety bolts shut, like I always did out of habit. The night started quietly. We drew with crayons, watched half an episode of Paw Patrol, and then brushed our teeth. At 8:25, I took them upstairs, read them a short story about a lost puppy, and turned on their nightlight. An LED moon that gave off a soft blue glow. They fell asleep right away. Downstairs, I texted my mom, spread my biology flashcards across the kitchen island, and poured myself a glass of cold drink. Everything seemed fine, until at 9:15 p.m. the doorbell rang. I jumped. The Davids hadn't mentioned that anyone might come that night. I approached the door cautiously and looked through the peephole. Outside, I saw a man in his mid-30s, wearing a gray hoodie, dark jeans, and athletic sneakers. In one hand, he held a key ring and gave a polite wave toward the doorbell camera. A black Honda sat running at the curb. He spoke in a calm tone, as if he knew I could hear him. "Hello, I'm Brandon, the kid's uncle. I forgot my keys earlier and I need to go in for a moment to the upstairs bedroom." His voice was steady, not pushy at all. Still, every internal alarm in me went off. The Davids had never mentioned having a brother or brother-in-law. I replied through the closed door, trying to keep my voice firm. "The parents didn't tell me anyone would be coming." "That was my mistake," he answered immediately. "I told my sister I had a spare key. Look, Sybil asked for her purple blanket, right? She always wants it when she's tired. And Tyler had macaroni and cheese before he put on his dinosaur pajamas. I know their routine. What he said was exact." My stomach nodded. Maybe he really was family. Or maybe he wasn't. I backed up a few steps and opened the baby monitor app. The kids were sleeping deeply, breathing calmly. Then I looked at the living room security tablet. On the outside camera, the man was still there, not touching the handle, just shifting his stance. I decided to call Mrs. David. No answer. I tried Mr. David. Voicemail. I hesitated for a moment about dialing 911. In Arizona, they fine people for false alarms, and I didn't want to be wrong. Suddenly, a notification sounded. "Sorry, the banquet is loud. Everything okay?" It was a message from Mrs. David. I typed quickly. "There's a man here who says he's Brandon, your brother. He says he needs to come in." The 3 typing dots appeared, and then her reply. "We don't have any brother. Call the police now." My hands started shaking. I took a deep breath and dialed 911. I gave the operator the address, the description of the subject, and emphasized that 2 children were asleep upstairs. While I was speaking with the operator, I heard a soft knock coming from the hallway. The man knocked again, keeping that polite, calm tone. "I really need that blanket," he said. "I promise it'll only be 2 minutes." I didn't respond. I stayed perfectly still, the phone pressed to my ear. After about 10 seconds, I saw him on the security screen move toward the front windows, trying to look inside by shading his eyes with his hands. I turned off the interior lights so he couldn't see me. In the dim glow of my phone, I watched him circle the front of the house, moving toward the side gate. A moment later, the backyard motion sensor turned on, and then turned off. The operator stayed on the line, her voice firm but calm. "Units are already on the way. They'll arrive in 3 minutes. Stay inside and keep all doors locked." I moved slowly to the patio door, checking the bolt. It was still firmly locked. I pulled the curtain back slightly. There was no movement. The silence became so thick that even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to have vanished. Soon after, I heard the distant sound of 2 sirens approaching, then cutting off as they reached the street. Red and blue lights flashed through the blinds, tinting the walls with intermittent bursts. I stood in the hallway, not moving, until I heard a voice from the porch. "Chandler Police Department," an officer announced, giving his badge number through the closed door. "You can open now." Only then did I undo the bolt and open the door. The officers searched the yard and nearby streets. The black Honda was gone. Tire marks remained on the pavement leading toward the main avenue. The neighbors' cameras didn't capture anything useful. The man had parked outside the recording range. Inside the house, the children were still asleep, unaware of everything. The police took my statement, congratulated me for acting cautiously, and stayed there until Mr. and Mrs. David returned, their faces pale with fright. Mrs. David hugged me so hard I could barely breathe. She kept repeating, "Thank you for protecting them." It was close to 12:30 a.m. when the patrol cars finally left. The Davids insisted on driving me home themselves, and I agreed. Though the entire ride I couldn't stop looking in the rearview mirror, afraid of seeing that black Honda following us in the distance. That night, once in my bedroom, I replayed every second in my mind. How had that man known what the kids had eaten for dinner, or the exact time they went to bed? Had he been watching us from some window before I arrived? Or did he hear something while we were talking? Days later, the Davids discovered a small gap between the frame and the lock of a window. Maybe he had pried it open slightly, just enough to listen from outside. He vanished before the police arrived, which meant he either used a police scanner app or had an instinct for getting away in time. Weeks passed before I worked up the courage to accept another night job. When I did, I arrived prepared. I put privacy film on exposed windows, reinforced weak locks, and kept a baseball bat within reach. I learned not to trust a calm voice or personal details that seemed believable. Later, the detectives who followed up on the case told me that other men with similar descriptions had been seen near elementary schools, collecting fragments of conversations to use as proof of familiarity. They believed the same individual had tried to enter 3 houses that month, always pretending a family connection. Knowing that didn't reassure me. On the contrary, it only showed me that his courteous, patient attitude was rehearsed. The case remains open, and no one has been arrested to this day. I still work as a babysitter, but only for relatives, and I never ignore a gut feeling. Over time, I understood that safety depends on small decisions: locking a side gate, not answering a stranger, verifying a story before believing it. That night, I made those decisions, and because of that, 2 children kept dreaming under a blue moon-shaped light instead of waking to the sound of strange footsteps inside their house. Sometimes, long after midnight, I wake up remembering that soft knock at the door and that patient, almost kind voice asking for a child's blanket. And I always think the same thing. I hope no one else ever opens the door for him. Story 2. I'm not one of those people who believe in ghost stories, and I don't have an overactive imagination, but what happened to me last month still keeps me up every night. My name is Leah. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a nurse at a small hospital in upstate New York. My shifts usually end late, so I drive home on lonely roads surrounded by forests and farmland. Normally, it's a quiet trip, Just me, my old Honda Civic, and the radio keeping me company. But that night, everything was different. It was around 11:30 p.m., and I was exhausted after 12 hours of work. My usual route was along Route 12, a two-lane road lined with trees and the occasional isolated gas station. About 5 kilometers from my house, I came across something unexpected. Orange construction signs and cones blocking the way. A large sign with an arrow pointing left directed traffic onto a side road I had never taken. The sign said, "Detour, roadwork." I let out a frustrated groan. I just wanted to get home, take a shower, and collapse into bed. But I had no choice, so I turned onto that narrow, unlit road. From the very start, the detour felt unsettling. It was barely wide enough for 2 cars, and the trees closed in like a dark tunnel on both sides. There were no streetlights, no houses, not the slightest sign of life. Only absolute darkness and the crunch of gravel under my tires. My headlights cut through the blackness, but they only lit a few meters ahead. I turned the radio volume down to focus, my fingers tense on the steering wheel. The road twisted constantly, and I expected to see workers, machinery, or any real sign of construction soon. But there was nothing, just endless trees and the steady hum of the engine. After about 10 minutes driving down that road, an uneasy feeling started growing in my chest. I hadn't seen a single car the entire time, and the road seemed to go on forever. I checked the GPS, but the signal was intermittent, and the app kept recalculating the route without success. "This doesn't feel right," I muttered to myself. That's when I looked in the rearview mirror, and I saw it. About 100 meters behind me, a truck was moving slowly. My stomach tightened instantly. Its headlights were off. Who drives at night without turning on their headlights? I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was someone local, taking the same detour. But the truck stayed there, matching my speed exactly, neither getting closer nor falling back. I pressed the accelerator, trying to put some distance between us. The truck accelerated too. My heart started pounding. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "You're overreacting," I told myself. "Maybe its lights are broken, or it's lost just like you." But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were no more detour signs. Not a single cone, not a single roadwork sign. They had completely disappeared. I realized I hadn't seen any evidence of construction on Route 12 either. No machinery, no torn-up pavement, no workers. Just those signs and cones blocking the road. Panic rose in my throat. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but the screen showed the inevitable. No service. Of course. Out there in the middle of nowhere, I was completely alone. The truck was still behind me, a dark shape lurking in the mirror like a shadow glued to mine. I pressed the accelerator harder. My Honda rattled over the uneven road, but I didn't care. The truck didn't fall back. At that distance, I could make out its shape. An older pickup, maybe black or dark blue, and in the low light I couldn't see the driver. I started talking to myself, trying to stay sane. "Okay, just find a way back to the main road. You're fine. Leah, you're fine." But the road kept twisting through the trees, and I had no idea where I was. Then, in the distance, I spotted a faint glow. A light filtered through the trees, getting closer little by little. Another vehicle, I thought. Relief washed through me. Maybe it was a police car or someone who could help. As it approached, I slowed down and flashed my high beams, trying to get its attention. It was a white SUV, and it also slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. I braked, kept my engine running, and lowered my window only a few centimeters, just enough to speak without exposing myself. "Hi," I shouted, my voice trembling. "I think someone is following me." The driver, a middle-aged man with glasses, leaned toward his window, looking at me with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked. I pointed behind me. There's a truck that's been following me for miles, with its lights off. He narrowed his eyes and staring into the darkness. Then his expression changed. There's no truck, he said firmly. I turned sharply to look in the rearview mirror. The road was empty, completely empty. My heart lurched. I swear it was there a few seconds ago, I stammered, feeling cold spread down my spine. The man sighed, not taking his eyes off the road. This place is strange, he said. They diverted me through here too, but there's no construction on Route 12. I checked. He looked at me seriously. You should follow me back to the main road. I nodded without thinking twice. I was too nervous to argue. I followed closely behind him, my eyes fixed on the mirrors, expecting to see those lights-off headlights behind me again. But there was nothing. Only darkness. We drove about 10 minutes until, finally, we reached Route 12 again. The detour signs and cones were gone, as if they had never existed. I stopped beside the SUV. Thank you, I said, my voice unsteady. The man nodded and said he would call the police to report it. I just nodded and drove home, locking every door the moment I stepped inside. When I got to my apartment, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with my eyes open, reliving every moment. The orange signs, the empty road, the truck that vanished as if it had never existed. The next morning, I called the sheriff's office to report what happened. The officer who spoke to me was clear. There had been no work scheduled on Route 12 that night. They also hadn't received any reports of detours in the area. I hung up with a knot in my stomach. Then I started looking for information online and found several local forums where other people described similar experiences. Fake detours, strange vehicles, roads that don't appear on maps. Some users said it was a cruel prank. Others hinted at something much darker, thieves, kidnappings, or something with no logical explanation. I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe it was a coincidence, a scam, or maybe I was so tired my mind played tricks on me. But no matter how much I try to rationalize it, I can't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about that road, as if it had been waiting for me. Since then, I take a different route home, even if it's longer. And every time I see a construction sign on the road, my heart jumps. I don't think I'll ever feel completely safe driving alone at night again. And even though I try to forget it, every so often when the clock hits 11:30 and the road goes empty, I feel that silent presence behind me again, waiting in the darkness with its headlights off. Story 3. I was 15 when I met the person who is now my husband. He had just turned 16, and we ended up in the same art class. Our small town didn't offer much in terms of fun for two teenagers who were just starting to date. Beyond the occasional visit to the local Target, there wasn't much else to do. Still, the place had its charm. It was a picturesque town, full of history, with a quiet atmosphere that attracted visitors from the surrounding areas. Many came to explore the old mining routes or to see the river that wound between the walls of the nearby canyon. That river was the heart of the area. Its winding trails and panoramic views offered an escape from routine, a corner where both locals and tourists could lose themselves in nature. I had grown up walking those trails, hiking, biking, or simply wandering without a destination. The place felt as familiar as my own backyard, and I had always considered it safe, a calm refuge where the murmur of water and the crunch of leaves created a kind of peace. There was one trail in particular that was my favorite, a half-mile walk that ended at a small bridge over the river. It wasn't an imposing bridge, but it offered a breathtaking view of the water flowing between the rocky canyon walls. It was a place where I always felt at peace, as if time stopped there. But near that spot there was another bridge, much larger and more famous, one of the highest in the world. a true engineering marvel that drew the curious and the adventurous alike. The trails around that second bridge offered spectacular views of the canyon and the river winding far below. However, its beauty had a dark side. Over the years, that bridge had become a tragic place, a setting where too many people had chosen to end their lives. The weight of those stories seemed to linger in the air, like a silent shadow that followed anyone who came close. One afternoon, wanting a small adventure, my husband and I decided to walk to the smaller bridge. It was around 6 p.m. The river rested deep in the canyon, and the steep walls made the sunlight disappear early. Even though the trail was familiar to me, that time I felt a slight but persistent unease. The canyon's darkness was creeping in faster than usual, and the air felt heavy, dense, as if the atmosphere itself were warning something. The walk to the bridge was short, barely half a mile, with a right turn that led directly to it. But as we moved forward, the light faded with unusual speed, and the forest around us began to fall silent. The usual sounds, the bird song, the wind through the branches, the murmur of the water, vanished little by little, replaced by a thick silence, almost unnatural. When we finally reached the turnoff toward the bridge, everything was submerged in absolute darkness. Even though it was barely 7 p.m., it felt like midnight. The canyon's shadow had closed over us. We turned on our phone flashlights, and their beams barely lit a few steps ahead. The rest of the world seemed to have been erased. I felt a growing discomfort, a sense of danger I couldn't explain. I had walked that trail dozens of times, but that night something wasn't right. I suggested to my husband that we go back, but he, braver, or maybe more stubborn, insisted we keep going. "We're so close," he told me. "Just one more minute." We walked a few more steps and suddenly I stopped dead. Only about a meter off the trail, right where the bridge began, there was a figure standing there. My flashlight beam caught its back, and my heart jumped. It was huge. It had to be between 6 feet 3 inches and well over 6 feet 6 inches, with a broad, heavy build, maybe between 200 and 240 pounds. It wore a brown flannel shirt and dark pants, maybe blue or black. Its brown hair stuck straight up in a strange way, too straight, as if it had been shaped artificially. But it wasn't only its size that unsettled me. Its proportions were wrong. Its arms were too long, hanging in a way that didn't look human. And its head, round and perfectly spherical, sat above its shoulders like a perfectly placed basketball. I couldn't see its feet. The ground fell into shadow right beneath it, which made the whole scene feel unreal, almost dreamlike. The man, if it was one, didn't move. It stayed perfectly still, facing the slope, toward the deeper darkness of the canyon. In a voice that was barely audible, I whispered, "What is that?" My husband didn't answer. When I looked at him, he was frozen, staring at the figure without even blinking. The three of us stayed like that, motionless, in unbearable tension. A minute can seem short, but when your heart is pounding and your whole body is screaming at you to run, it becomes an eternity. The figure didn't move, didn't turn its head, didn't show any sign that it had noticed us. And yet, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. My mind wouldn't stop asking questions. How had that man gotten there? We hadn't seen any other car in the parking area at the start of the trail. Why was it alone, with its back turned, in the deepest darkness? And why wasn't it moving? Not even when it must have heard us coming. Was it hiding its face, or was it hiding what it was doing? My husband, his voice shaky but firm, finally managed to say something. "Oh, man, what are you doing there?" The moment he said it, the figure began to turn, slowly, very slowly, too slowly. Every movement looked deliberate, as if it took effort, or as if it simply wanted us to watch it turn. I felt my stomach churn. A wave of nausea ran through me from head to toe. Suddenly, my instinct shouted what I had been trying to ignore until then. Run, now. I didn't wait to see its face. I grabbed my husband's arm and ran as hard as I could. My flashlight beam bounced from side to side as I ran, lighting up pieces of trail and shadows between the trees. The cold air burned my lungs, and the pounding in my ears sounded louder than my own footsteps. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if it was following us. Behind me, I heard my husband shout my name, his footsteps pounding the ground as he tried to catch up. I was ahead, running on pure terror. Finally, we saw the empty parking lot at the end of the trail. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys into the lock. We climbed into the car, gasping, hearts racing out of control. There wasn't a single other vehicle, no one, just us. And the distant echo of the river. I sped off without looking back. The drive back to town was 5 or 6 miles, depending on the route, and there was no cell service the entire way. I didn't say a single word, neither did he. Only when the first city lights appeared on the horizon did I feel like I could breathe again. For the rest of the drive, neither of us spoke. Fear kept tightening around our chests, and the image of that figure stayed burned into my mind like a photograph I couldn't erase. A few days passed before curiosity outweighed fear. I couldn't stop thinking about what we had seen. Was it a person? A prank? Some strange effect of the light? I convinced my husband to go back, this time during the day and with a group of friends just in case. I needed to understand what had happened, to give it a logical explanation. Maybe it was a jacket hanging on a post, a misshapen rock, or even some forgotten set piece from a local project. But when we reached the exact spot where that figure had been, there was absolutely nothing. No post, no clothes, no hat. Nothing that could explain what we had seen that night. However, something did catch my attention and made me go cold all over again. The place where that thing had been standing wasn't flat. The ground dropped sharply, a fall of nearly 5 feet deep. I did the math in my head. If that being had really been standing there, it wasn't 2 meters tall like we had thought. It was closer to 2.5 to 3 meters. The realization hit me like a punch. What we had seen wasn't just tall, it was impossibly tall. Since then, I've never looked at the river or its trails the same way. This town has a deep history, woven between the beautiful and the tragic. The old mines, the lives lost at the high bridge, the canyon's calm. All of it seems intertwined, as if the place itself has its own awareness. I don't know what we saw that night. I've told the story to friends, family, even strangers, and no one has an answer. Was it a person, a spirit, something completely different? All I know is that the image of that unmoving figure, planted in the darkness of the canyon, follows me to this day. It's a part of the river I'll never be able to fully understand, a mystery that remains, like a silent shadow in the middle of the canyon. Story 4. I've kept this to myself for a long time. Last year, it felt safer not to say anything. But silence doesn't help anyone. Someone out there might need a warning. I work as a security guard at a small airport in Germany. Most flights leave before dawn, so my shift is always overnight. For 5 years, the job was monotonous. Checking doors, scanning credentials, watching cameras. It was mid-July, peak travel season. Families pushed strollers. Tourists dragged noisy suitcases. And every check-in counter had an endless line. Even with all that movement, that night something felt different. I couldn't explain it, but the atmosphere felt charged, as if something invisible was altering the air. I decided to stick to my routine and not think about it. Around midnight, I went out to take my break. I went to the lobby bakery, bought a chocolate bar and an energy drink, and sat down at a metal table. While I watched a short video on my phone, I felt a sudden urge to turn around. Behind me, and there was a man in a black rain jacket. His hood was down, and his eyes locked directly onto mine. He didn't look away. He didn't pretend to be watching the shops or the movement in the airport. He was only watching me. I held his gaze for a couple of seconds before looking back down at my phone. Strange travelers pass through airports every day. Most of them are harmless. I forced myself to ignore him. I finished half the drink, slipped my phone into my pocket, and went into the bathroom to wash my hands before my break ended. When I returned to my post, I saw him again. He was about 50 meters away, in the main corridor. His head was tilted, and his eyes were fixed on me again. The moment he noticed I had seen him, he turned sharply and disappeared into a side hallway, silent without hesitation. A silent alarm went off in my mind. He hadn't broken any rule, but something about him chilled my blood. I went back to my rounds, checking doors and locks, watching the cameras, trying to ignore the feeling that someone was watching me. I waited for sunrise. When morning came, the terminal began to fill with light and noise, and exhaustion hit me hard. My phone had died, so I put it in my pocket and started walking home. I lived nearby. The walk only took a few minutes. Halfway there, I remembered I had a power bank in my backpack. I pulled out the cable, plugged in my phone, and kept walking while it slowly turned on. About 10 minutes from my apartment, I pressed the power button to check the charge level. That's when a message appeared that I had never seen before. Unknown AirTag detected. It is moving with you. Distance 800 meters. I stopped cold. I didn't own any AirTag. Cold sweat ran down my neck. I looked around. The street was empty, lit only by a row of dim streetlights. There was no one. No cars. No footsteps. Suddenly, another notification appeared. Distance 600 meters. Then another 500. I tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe someone had lost their luggage nearby, or a passenger had an active tracker in the area. But the numbers kept dropping. 400, 300. My breathing sped up. I started running. My phone vibrated again. 200 meters. I turned the corner and ran as hard as I could. My legs trembled. The air burned my lungs, but I kept going without looking back. 100 meters. I could already see my building. I ran up the stairs 2 at a time, shoved the key into the lock, got inside, and slammed the door shut. I pressed my back against it, gasping while the phone kept sending alerts. 50 meters. 20. 10. I looked up and peered through the peephole. Nothing. Just the empty street. Still air and the orange light of a street lamp flickering in the distance. With shaking hand, I dumped my pockets and backpack onto the floor. Nothing unusual. No device. No trace. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? A signal on my screen says someone is following me. No one would take it seriously. I told myself I was exhausted, that the shift had been long, and that my mind was playing tricks on me. I changed clothes, lay down in bed, and put on a horror video on my phone. The narrator's slow, steady voice always helped me fall asleep. I remember the first few minutes, and then sleep took me. I don't know how long I slept. I woke up in complete darkness. The video had ended, but the phone screen still glowed faintly on the nightstand. When I looked on, I saw a new notification. Unknown AirTag detected. It is moving with you. Distance 2 meters. 2 meters. That meant it was inside my bedroom. Fear pinned me in place. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe normally. I locked the screen. The light disappeared. My eyes took a few seconds to adjust to the dimness. Then I saw him. At the foot of the bed, beside the wardrobe, a silhouette stood. A man in a black rain jacket. The same face. The same stare. A harsh sound escaped my throat, half scream, half groan. He stepped back once, calmly opened the door, and vanished before my feet even touched the floor. When the police arrived, the apartment was empty. No fingerprints, no traces, no trackable device, only a damp footprint near the bed. The officers checked every room, the windows, the landing, even the door frame. There were no signs of forced entry. The only key inside the apartment was mine. They advised me to stay with a relative. That night I slept on my sister's couch, with the hallway light on and my phone set to alert me at the slightest movement. The next morning, I went back with a locksmith. We installed new deadbolts and a camera above the door. Then I emptied my backpack onto the kitchen table. There it was. At the bottom, sewn under the lining of an inner pocket, there was a small white plastic disc smaller than a coin, an AirTag. Someone had cut the fabric, slipped the tracker in, and sealed the seam again with the glue. So perfectly I never noticed. To do that, that person would have had to be close enough to slip a hand into my backpack without me realizing. Maybe at the bakery. Maybe when I checked the time on my watch as I left the airport. I'll never know. Wearing gloves, I put the tracker into a sealed plastic bag like it was evidence. Since then, it stayed on my desk, inside that small, transparent wrapper. A constant reminder that danger can have an ordinary face and be right behind you without making a sound. I still work overnight shifts at the airport, but I don't walk home anymore. Every time my phone vibrates in my pocket, a chill runs through me, and I can't help imagining that silent stare, waiting, measuring the moment I noticed his presence. I've thought 1,000 times about what could have happened if I hadn't run, if I had slept more deeply, or if I had never checked my phone that morning. I barely made it. That certainty stays with me every night. If you ever feel like you're being watched, listen to that instinct. Don't ignore it. Don't tell yourself you're tired or overreacting. Act quickly. I was lucky, but the next person might not be. Story 5. I've always loved camping. The smell of pine, the crackle of the fire, the stillness of the woods. It's the place where I feel truly alive. Last summer, my friends Jake, Matt, Amber, and I planned a weekend in Blackwood Forest, a vast area of pines about 2 hours from our town. It's a very popular place, but it's so large that there are trails that disappear for miles and areas where the trees completely block out the sunlight. We'd camped there before, so we weren't worried. But that trip, I'll never forget it. Months have passed and I still wake up drenched in sweat, thinking about Jake. We arrived at Blackwood on a Friday afternoon. The 4 of us were squeezed into Matt's old Jeep. The air was warm, but once we got deeper into the forest, the temperature dropped and it felt cool and pleasant. We set up camp near a small stream, in a clearing with a stone fire pit other campers had left behind. Jake was in a good mood, joking and tossing a ball while Amber put up the tent. He was always the extrovert, the guy who could make you laugh even when you were upset. Matt, quieter, was already focused on starting the fire, while I unloaded the cooler with sodas, hot dogs, and the usual camping stuff. Night fell fast. By 9 p.m., the darkness was so thick you couldn't even see your hand in front of your face without a flashlight. We sat around the fire, roasting marshmallows and telling stupid stories. Then Jake started talking about an old legend about Blackwood. He said that in the 80s, people used to disappear in the forest and they never found them. Amber rolled her eyes, called it a cheap campfire story, and we all laughed. But I noticed Jake was looking at the trees too often, like he expected something to come out of the shadows. Around 11, He said he was going for a short walk. "I'm going to pee and check the stream," he said, grabbing his flashlight. Amber warned him not to go too far. He smiled and replied, "I'm not a kid, Mom." That was Jake, cocky but good-hearted. We didn't think much of it. The stream was about 100 meters from camp, and we could clearly hear the water running. 10 minutes passed, and then 20. Amber started getting nervous, checking her phone over and over. "He's probably trying to scare us," Matt said, though his voice didn't sound convinced. I grabbed my flashlight and shouted, "Jake, stop messing around." My voice vanished into the trees like the forest swallowed it. No answer. And in that moment, my stomach tightened. Blackwood is big, yes, but not so big that someone can get lost that fast. There was no way Jake had gone that far in just a few minutes. We decided to go look for him. Amber stayed at camp in case he came back while we were gone, and Matt and I split up to cover more ground. I took the path toward the stream, shining my flashlight at the ground in between the trees. The beam lit roots, rocks, and bushes, but there was no sign of Jake. Every few steps I shouted his name, but the sound disappeared into the thickness. No response, not even an echo. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No crickets, no owls, no leaves moving. Just the crunch of my boots on pine needles and my own breathing. I kept expecting to see him suddenly appear with that mischievous "I scared you" grin, but the farther I went, the worse the atmosphere felt. It was like the entire forest was holding its breath. Then my flashlight beam reflected off something by the stream. It was Jake's flashlight. It was lying on the ground, still on, pointing toward a cluster of ferns. I froze for a few seconds, my heart racing. Jake wasn't careless. He would never have dropped his flashlight like that. I picked it up and shouted his name louder. Nothing. My hands were shaking so much the beam danced over the mud. That's when I saw it. Boot prints marked into the bank. They were Jake's, without a doubt. They went straight toward the water and stopped abruptly, as if he had vanished mid-step. A chill ran up my spine. I yelled for Matt, my voice cracking. He came running through the trees, and when he saw the flashlight in my hand, his face went pale. "Where is he?" he asked, breathless. "I don't know," I said. "I only found this, and the tracks go right to the water. Then they disappear." We looked at each other without saying anything else. We both knew something didn't add up. We started searching like crazy, shouting, sweeping the light between trunks, along the stream behind rocks. Nothing. Only silence and darkness. We kept searching for hours. Amber joined us after a while, her eyes swollen from crying and her voice hoarse from yelling Jake's name. We followed the stream, the nearby trails, and we even went back to camp in case he had made it back another way. Nothing. Not a trace. It was close to 2 a.m, and exhaustion was starting to win. But none of us wanted to stop. Amber was shaking, blaming herself non-stop. We shouldn't have let him go alone, she kept repeating, sobbing. Matt barely spoke. He kept staring into the trees as if he could force them to give Jake back just by looking. I kept sweeping the flashlight around, waiting to see any sign, anything that would explain what had happened. The air felt strangely heavy, like the forest was alive and watching us. Every crackle in the branches made me turn, expecting, or fearing, to find something. At dawn, we decided to call the police. There was a ranger station not far away, and within less than an hour, rangers arrived, tracking dogs and even a helicopter. We showed them the flashlight, the footprints by the stream, and the spot where they ended. One of the officers took notes and asked if Jake had been acting strange lately. I shook my head. No, he was just Jake. Happy, dumb, adventurous. Jake. The ranger nodded, but his expression said something else. He was thinking the worst, and I understood. Blackwood had a reputation. Over the years, like people had gotten lost in that forest. Hikers, campers, even locals. Most came back. Some never did. Days passed and the search expanded. Volunteers arrived, more dogs, and even drones to fly over the deepest areas. We stayed at the campsite, barely sleeping, helping however we could. Amber was a sea of tears. Matt, growing quieter by the day, looked at the forest with hatred, like he believed that if he challenged it hard enough, Blackwood would spit his friend back out. I couldn't stop replaying that night in my head. The laughter stopped in the sudden darkness, the flashlight still shining on the ground. None of it made sense. The rangers found no clothing, no blood, no signs of a struggle. They checked caves, ravines, and old logging roads deeper in the forest. The dogs lost the scent right at the stream, exactly where the footprints ended. One of the rangers, an older man, came up to me and said quietly, "Sometimes people just disappear. Blackwood is treacherous. Too many places to get lost." I wanted to hit him. Jake hadn't gotten lost. Jake was gone, and the forest had taken him. Weeks turned into months. The search lost intensity, and over time it shrank until it almost stopped. More people came. More resources were used, but hope kept giving way to cold reality. There were no new leads. The police said they would keep the case open, but you could hear it in their voices. They weren't expecting a miracle anymore. Amber couldn't take it and moved far away. Staying only reminded her too much of what happened. I barely run into Matt anymore. When I do, the conversation gets stuck in our throats, as if saying Jake's name would dig up an open wound. I still go back to Blackwood sometimes. I go to the stream, sit where the footprints ended and stare at the water. Sometimes I don't even know what I'm looking for. A sign, an explanation, something that makes it all fit. I've read about disappearances in forests, similar cases, theories about wild animals, hidden sinkholes, forgotten caves, and it all makes sense when there's evidence. Here, there isn't any. There are also people on forums who talk about strange things, lights between the trees, voices calling hikers deeper in. I've never fully believed those stories, but there are nights when I wonder if Jake saw something, if he followed something that called him. Sometimes I dream about him. In the dreams, I'm back by the stream and I see him standing there smiling like nothing ever happened. I walk closer and, when I'm near, his face empties out. It's not Jake anymore. I wake up gasping, my heart pounding in my chest. I don't know what happened to him. I don't think I'll ever know. I only know one thing clearly. I will never camp in Blackwood again. The forest took my friend. I'm not going to give it the chance to take me too. Story 6. It all started with a guy named Isaiah. He was a landscaper I met about a year before the incident. To give you context, I also worked in gardening and landscaping. That's why this story exists. At the time, I worked for a company that gave me a lot of trouble. I can't mention its name for legal reasons. And I met Isaiah at a dump while I was unloading a work trailer. I was the driver and foreman. He came up to me and started a conversation. Nothing strange at first. I told him I'd been in the trade for a year and that I dreamed of having my own business someday. Isaiah gave me his business card, but I didn't pay much attention. I already had work at that time. Fast forward to the day everything changed. I don't remember the exact year, but I called Isaiah's number when I got fired from my job and needed work. He remembered me immediately and offered to pick me up at 6 a.m. At that time, I didn't have a car, so I gave him my address. I was relieved to have found work again, or at least I thought I was. I woke up at 4:30 a.m. My ex and her father worked at 5, so I woke up with them. I'm not proud, but after they left, I used a substance I shouldn't have used. I don't do that anymore. Right after that, Isaiah called. I got ready quickly. Jeans, work boots, a hoodie, and I left the house still adjusting my belt and laces. When he arrived, I got into his truck. We greeted each other and I asked if I could vape. He said yes, and we got on the highway. That's when everything started getting weird. Isaiah asked me if I'd had my morning sausage. I didn't understand and asked what he meant. He laughed and said something obscene related to sex. I told him I wasn't comfortable with those kinds of jokes. He just laughed again. A few minutes later, he pulled over on the side of the road to check the trailer. I had a bad feeling, but I tried to convince myself it was just anxiety. When he got back in, he started asking even stranger questions like whether I'd ever thought about becoming a dancer. I said no, but he kept insisting, telling me I had potential. I reminded him I had a boyfriend and that I wouldn't do something like that. We kept driving. Suddenly, he put his hand on my leg. I told him to stop. He laughed again and slowly removed it, like he was mocking me. We stopped at a gas station and I took the opportunity to use the bathroom. I made another mistake. I used again. When I came back, he texted me asking if I wanted something to drink. I asked for a Red Bull. He brought it. I thanked him and we kept going. But that feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. I called my sister, telling her I felt like something bad was going to happen. At first she laughed, but I insisted I was serious. I hung up when I saw Isaiah coming back to the vehicle. Not long after, he opened the glove compartment, pulled out a knife, and told me to be quiet. I froze. Then he smiled and said he was joking, that he used it to cut fruit. I laughed nervously, but the fear was already there. We reached a gated community, one of those private neighborhoods with security. Isaiah talked to the security guard, gave him the 2 addresses where we were going to work, and also gave my name. I was too scared to say a word. The first job took only about half an hour, but it felt like an eternity. Isaiah wouldn't stop invading my personal space. He stood too close, made inappropriate comments about my body, and every time I tried to step away, he laughed like it was all a game. The second job took about an hour, and his behavior continued, just as bad or worse. I tried to stay busy, focus on the work, but every word from him made me tenser. At one point, I decided to fake confidence and said something in a challenging tone, hoping to scare him a little, make him think I wasn't afraid. At the same time, I kept texting my sister, telling her everything that was happening. He noticed and asked with a smile, "Who are you texting so much?" I lied. I told him it was about plans after work. That's when real terror hit me. I thought, this man could hurt me and nobody would know where I am. I opened the Red Bull he'd bought me and drank some to stay awake. Around 11 a.m., Isaiah said we were done for the day. But that wasn't true. The worst hadn't even started. While he was driving, he started speaking Spanish on the phone. I didn't understand much, but the tone of his voice made me even more nervous. Then he asked if I had plans later. I lied again. Yeah, I've got stuff to do. Then he smiled and said something that made my stomach drop. Your boyfriend doesn't get off work for another 3 hours, right? And he mentioned the name of the company where my boyfriend worked. I felt the air leave my chest. How could he know that? Isaiah suggested going to a hotel. I tried to stay calm, but inside panic was choking me. I started texting my family, trying to alert them without raising suspicion. I had no idea where we were. The area was completely unfamiliar to me. In the middle of all that, he asked if I used drugs. I said no. Then he made a call to order something and laughed, staring straight at me while he spoke. He asked my age. I told him I was 19. Then he started asking more and more personal and obscene questions. I answered with deliberate nonsense, making things up, trying to confuse him or distract him. Eventually, we got back into the city. I finished the Red Bull, planning to run the moment I had a chance. Isaiah started talking about his family, his wife and kids, and as I listened, Vaughn, all I could think was, how can he say these things and act like a predator at the same time? We stopped at a bank near my house. For a moment, I thought I could get out and escape, but first I wanted to try something. I asked him, how would you feel if someone did this to your wife or your daughter? He slammed my head against the window. Everything spun, but I managed to stay calm. He said the money was for some plans I had never agreed to, and we kept driving. As we kept moving down the road, I recognized my neighborhood. We drove past my street, and I caught a glimpse of my mother and grandmother outside, watering plants. I had to hold back tears. If I did something impulsive, I could put them in danger too. We kept going. We even passed right in front of the police station. And then I remembered, you can text 911. I unlocked my phone discreetly and typed, my name is Maria. I am 19 years old. I am in a truck with a man named Isaiah. He is holding me. Please help me. The response came almost instantly. They asked where I was, what kind of vehicle, and whether I was in immediate danger. I gave as many details as I could without him noticing anything. Isaiah looked at me and asked, are you tired? In that moment, everything clicked. He had drugged the Red Bull. My body felt heavy, but the effects of what I had taken earlier seemed to block the chemical sleep. It was a twisted kind of luck, but maybe that's what kept me conscious. He offered to stop and buy another drink. I said yes, trying to buy time or create an opportunity to escape. We stopped at a gas station, but he threatened me. If you try to run, it'll be worse for you. He stared at me while he pumped gas. I pretended to stay calm. We drove to another stop, a small store. I told him I was hungry, that I wanted to buy something to eat and go inside. For some reason, he agreed. The moment I walked in, I started knocking products off the shelves on purpose, pretending to be clumsy, anything to get the employees' attention. Then I went to the bathroom and locked it. Inside, there was another woman. I pressed the phone to my ear and started speaking loudly to my ex, explaining everything that was happening, hoping the woman would understand I needed help. The woman knocked and asked if I was okay. I answered desperately, yeah, but I need help. She left immediately and told Isaiah, who was waiting outside, that the bathroom was locked. A moment later, I heard a bang on the door and a firm voice. Police, you're safe. You can come out. I opened the door and threw myself at one of the officers, hugging him as I broke down crying. I had survived. Outside, I saw Isaiah's truck surrounded by patrol cars. He tried to get closer to me, but the officers stopped him immediately. I told them everything, every detail. One of the officers walked me to the patrol car and told me Isaiah denied everything. I asked them to test the drink. The result came back positive. It contained sleeping pills. Even so, the officers treated it like a he said, she said, as if it wasn't clear. They took me home, collected my clothes as evidence, and told me to lock my doors and windows. I called my mother to come get me. When I got into her car, I collapsed and cried like I never had before. We told the whole family I was safe. That night I slept somewhere else, with the feeling that danger was still lurking. Over time, I tried to rebuild my life. I spent a few weeks living with relatives, avoiding being alone, while the police kept investigating. But deep down, I knew the case was going cold. When things calmed down a little, I went back home and tried to get back to a routine. I kept working in landscaping because, ironically, it was the only thing that still made me feel somewhat normal. Today, on in 2025, I'm 22 years old and still in the trade, but the peace never fully returned. Strange things started happening. Calls from unknown numbers where you could only hear breathing on the other end before they hung up. Some mornings, when I left the house, I found photographs of myself in the mailbox or on the door, images taken from a distance without knowing when or how. I told the police. They said it was probably a prank, maybe a coincidence, but I know it isn't. I feel it in my stomach, that same feeling I had that day on the road. The fear has never completely gone away. I've changed my routines, installed cameras, and I check every door twice before I sleep. Still, every time my phone vibrates, my body tenses, hoping it isn't him. Sometimes I think about how ironic it is. The substance I shouldn't have used might have saved my life, keeping me from falling completely asleep when he drugged me. If I hadn't stayed awake, I wouldn't be here telling this. I don't know if Isaiah is still free. I don't know if he's still looking for me. But I do know I survived. And for me, that changes everything. Because if I learned one thing, it's this. When your instinct tells you something isn't right, listen. Don't hesitate. Don't justify it. Don't wait. Run, ask for help. Make noise. Fear can save you. It saved me. Story 7. My name is Ella. I'm 17 years old, and I work at a football stadium in my state. For personal reasons, I'm not going to say the name or the exact location. To give a bit of context, the stadium has 3 main clubs, where members who pay a membership can eat, drink, buy raffle tickets, meet the mascots, and enjoy an excellent view of the field. The first one, called the Women's Club, was on the ground floor where the players' families usually gathered to watch both the women's and men's games. The second, Inter F, was located on the west side of the stadium. And the third, the biggest and busiest, was ZAG, the club where I worked as a cleaning assistant and beverage attendant. ZAG was located on the east side of the stadium. Recently, there was an important match between 2 major teams, which meant the tension was higher than normal. In regular games, I usually recognize many of the attendees because they're frequent customers, but at events like that, everything is full of new faces, people you see only once in your life. Everything was normal until halftime approached. During the break, club members can come back in from the stands and enjoy the food that's already prepared. I was in charge of collecting plates, refilling utensils, checking the food bar, taking photos of families, and of course working the soda station. I was behind the counter, filling cups with soda, when the line started growing non-stop. Then an older man approached, maybe 60 or 70 years old. "Hi, what can I get you?" I said with my practiced smile. "Coca-Cola," he replied in a harsh voice, like someone who had smoked his whole life. I poured his drink and kept filling ice for the next person, but I noticed the man didn't move. "The straws are right there," I told him, pointing to the end of the counter, thinking he was waiting for one. Still, he didn't move. He just stared at me, longer than normal, with an expression that made me uncomfortable. Finally, after a few endless seconds, he walked away. But shortly after, he came back. "Hi again," I said, forcing a smile. "Do you need a refill?" He watched me and, in that same raspy voice, asked, "How old are you?" I let out a nervous laugh, not knowing how to respond. "I can't say. Company policy," I said, just wanting him to leave. He smiled, showing yellowed, worn teeth, and looked at my name embroidered on my uniform. "Ella, huh?" he said, in a tone that made my skin go cold. A pretty name for a pretty girl. It wasn't unusual for some customers, especially drunk ones, to flirt with women on staff, but that comment felt different, more personal, more disturbing. I just smiled and thanked him. pretending politeness until he finally walked away. As soon as I had the chance, I went to the kitchen and told my coworkers what had happened. They laughed a little and admitted, yeah, it was uncomfortable, but they didn't make a big deal out of it. Luckily, I didn't see him again for the rest of the night. Or so I thought. After the game, when we started cleaning, people left little by little. The stadium noise faded, and only employees remained, picking up plates, cups, and towels. We were heading toward the main kitchen, which was on the lower level, where dishes were washed and dirty linens were stored. I was last, pushing a cart full of things, when I saw him again. He was there, standing next to the bathrooms, watching us. My body tensed instantly. My intuition screamed that something wasn't right. The game had ended more than 30 minutes earlier. So why was he still there? And more than that, what was he doing in that part of the stadium so far from the main exits? I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. Maybe he was waiting for someone, or he was simply lost. Still, I felt a chill run down my spine. I kept walking without looking back. I clocked out at the employee time clock and took my usual route, the one that went around the stadium and out to the main street where my car was parked. That route was usually safe. There were always police directing traffic, both pedestrians and vehicles, to disperse the crowd. I relaxed a little until I got about a block away from the stadium. The red and blue lights of the patrol cars were already shining in the distance, and the noise of the crowd had faded. It was late, but not too late, a normal night after a big match. I stopped for a moment to pull my car keys out of my bag. That's when I saw him. Him. He was walking under a street light, and there was no doubt it was the same man. My stomach dropped. I quickened my pace, and he did too. I could feel him getting closer and closer. The shadows seemed to move with us. My breathing turned short and ragged. I reached my car with my hands shaking in fear. I tried to get the key into the lock, but my fingers wouldn't cooperate. The sound of his footsteps grew nearer and nearer, and then I felt a cold hand grab my shoulder. I spun around. It was him. So close I could smell his breath, a mix of alcohol and stale tobacco. He was holding something in his hand, but the darkness of the alley kept me from seeing what it was. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed my arm and started dragging me. Panic took over. I thought, if I disappear, someone has to know I was here. So with what little strength I had, I yanked out a strand of my own hair and dropped it on the ground, hoping it would serve as a clue if anything happened to me. I fought with everything I had. I scratched his arm, kicked him, hit him, doing whatever I could to get free. Then 2 men turned the corner from the parking lot of a small business. They froze when they saw what was happening. "Help me!" I screamed, almost voiceless, begging for my life. The men ran toward us. One of them grabbed my other arm while the second shoved the old man, separating us. I broke free, sobbing, trembling from head to toe. I pulled out my phone and through tears dialed 911. Within minutes, police cars arrived. Red and blue lights flooded the street, reflecting off the windows of the closed shops. The man was arrested on the spot. He was still trying to get close to me when the officers restrained him and pinned him to the ground. I kept crying and shaking uncontrollably. The 2 men who had helped me stayed with me until the officers arrived. I thanked them through sobs. Without them, I don't know if I'd be alive today. When the police pulled me aside to take my statement, one of them walked me to his patrol car and spoke to me calmly. He said the man denied everything, claiming he had only been trying to help me find my car. But I had no doubts. I told them every detail. The first encounter at the soda station, how he watched me after the game, how he followed me to the parking area and grabbed my arm. I asked them to take my fingerprints and search the area. Maybe my hair would still be on the ground. They promised they would. Later, They told me the man's fingerprints matched those from 2 other attempted kidnappings at stadiums in different cities. It wasn't the first time he had done this. Since that night, I haven't felt calm again. 2 weeks have passed, but I'm still afraid to walk to my car alone. Now I park much closer to the stadium, and I always carry something to defend myself. I don't trust anymore that nothing bad can happen in a place full of people. I'm eternally grateful to the 2 men who showed up at exactly the right time. If they hadn't turned that corner, I don't know what would have happened to me. Now I understand something I didn't value before. If your instinct tells you something is wrong, listen. It might seem exaggerated, it might embarrass you, but that feeling could save your life. Story 8. I belong to a small scout troop in Belgium. Every summer, we choose one night to test our courage. We visit an old World War II fort that everyone calls Fort 17. The army closed it a long time ago. The front doors are blocked with bricks and thick steel plates. Trees and moss grow on the roof, as if nature decided to erase it from the map. To most people, it's just an abandoned place, but to us, it's the perfect setting for a secret adventure. We always arrive after midnight. The road next to the fort still has some traffic, so we leave the van 2 bends before. We turn off all lights, even our phone lights, and cover the shiny parts of our backpacks with dark cloth. We speak only in whispers. Every time a car passes, we freeze like statues until the headlights disappear. The only possible entrance is a tall crack in the outer wall. Years ago, older scouts placed metal bolts to anchor climbing ropes. One by one, like we clip in with our harnesses and start climbing. The stone is cold and damp. Halfway up, I hear a truck approaching. I press myself against the wall, holding my breath, while the headlights sweep across the rock just centimeters below my boots. The engine roars, passes by, and the silence returns. I keep climbing until I can roll through the opening and get inside. The change is immediate. Inside the fort, the air is always cold, around 14 degrees Celsius, no matter the season. The sound of the road disappears completely. Even my breathing seems to stop. A faint draft slides between my legs, as if the place is exhaling on its own. The darkness is absolute. I can't even see my hand in front of my face. Our rule is clear. No flashlights allowed. We can only move by memory and touch. Each tunnel is so narrow that my shoulders scrape the walls. If I try to stand upright, my head hits the ceiling, so I move hunched over. Water running down the walls soaks my sleeves. My footsteps echo and bounce, creating double echoes, as if someone is walking right behind me. When I stop, that echo takes one more step, like an invisible shadow that never leaves me. That night I was the guide. My job was to enter the fort first, crawl through the tunnels, and wait at a side fork to keep the new scouts from getting lost. They wouldn't know I was there. The goal was to scare them a little and teach them to stay calm in the dark. I counted my steps, turned down the right corridor, and found my little spot, a cold notch in the concrete wall. I crouched, rested my gloved hands on the wet floor, and prepared to wait. Time in the darkness turns liquid. You don't know whether minutes or hours have passed. My ears started picking up tiny sounds that normally get lost. The rub of my scarf against my arm, the murmur of wind in the tunnels, the distant echo of a single drop falling. After what felt like an eternity, I saw a faint light flicker far away. It came from the far end of the main corridor, moving slowly, rising and falling, like a candle held by someone walking carefully. I thought maybe some clever scout had hidden a match or a birthday candle. I knew flashlights were forbidden, but we never said anything about candles. I smiled silently. I planned to jump out, scare him, and confiscate it. However, as I watched more closely, something unsettled me. The light was smaller than I expected, barely the size of a pea. and its color wasn't orange, but a cold white, almost like the reflection of ice. I leaned forward a little, trying to hear the footsteps of whoever carried it. Nothing. Not a single sound. When the light was about 5 meters from me, it went out. Just like that. As if someone had pinched it between their fingers. The darkness swallowed everything again. I stayed motionless, waiting to hear the scrape of shoes or the whisper of a laugh. But there was nothing. Only the absolute silence of concrete and my heart hammering in my chest. Then I heard something else. A rough whispering sound, like fabric rubbing against stone right in front of me. Before I could react, a burst of warm, damp air brushed my face. A smell of sweat and earth hit my nose. It was the smell of a person who has been walking for a long time. Someone was there just inches away, but I couldn't see them. I held my breath, and at the same time, the other person stopped breathing too. We stayed that way, motionless, sharing the same tiny pocket of air, as if we were mirrored in an invisible glass. Seconds passed like full minutes. My lungs burned, my head buzzed. I didn't dare move a finger, until, finally, the warm air slid to my left, disappearing slowly. The space turned cold again. Far away in the tunnel, a red glow appeared for a second, and then vanished. Silence again. I waited, slowly counted to 40, and let out the air I'd been holding. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stay crouched. I thought about running for the escape rope, but I remembered my job. The younger scouts would be entering soon, and I had to stay. So I kept waiting, my heart pounding as if it wanted to escape before I did. After a long time, I finally heard footsteps coming from my left. This time they were heavy, steady, the distinctive sound of the military-style boots we all wear on group outings. Relief washed over me instantly. I thought, finally, it must be the boys coming in. A tall silhouette filled the corridor. I recognized the shape of the helmet, the backpack, the way he walked. I reached out and rested a hand on his arm, barely touching him. "Keep going straight," I whispered. "Then take the first tunnel on the right. Stay together." He nodded silently. But before I let him go, I asked a quick question, still in a low voice. "Who was the first one to climb up tonight?" The boy frowned, confused. "Me," he said. "I'm the first." I went cold. If he was the first to enter, then who had been next to me a few minutes earlier? I didn't say anything. I let him pass and listened as he disappeared into the darkness, his steps fading in a steady rhythm. But the air in the tunnel didn't feel the same anymore. It was colder, heavier, as if something had stayed beside me, invisible. The rest of the night was endless. 3 more scouts passed my position. I gave them instructions with a light tap on the shoulder, as always. None of them mentioned seeing a light or hearing anyone else. When the last one passed, I waited about 10 more minutes. Then I stood up. My knees cracked, my legs felt numb. The silence inside the fort pressed on my chest like a stone. I started walking toward the exit tunnel, keeping one hand on the wall at all times to orient myself. Every step I took echoed, and behind each one another step sounded. One extra step, an echo that wasn't mine. I picked up my pace. The echo did too. I tried to convince myself it was just the strange shape of the corridors. That sound bounced in a particular way. I repeated it over and over, like saying it would make it true. Finally, I reached the exit shaft. Climbing out was much harder than climbing down. My arms were shaking, but I managed to grab the rope and climb. A pale strip of dawn was beginning to filter through the trees. Birds were singing. The outside world looked so normal, so indifferent to what I had just lived. Outside, the other scouts were laughing by the van, showing off scrapes and rope burns. When they saw me, they asked why I looked so pale. I only said I was tired. On the drive back, we left the windows open, letting the fresh morning air sweep away the fort's cold. No one mentioned anything strange, and neither did I. I never spoke about the tiny white light or the warm breath that brushed my face in the darkness. But ever since then, every summer when the troop plans another night at Fort 17, I make one change. I never go in alone again. I'd rather stay near the rope, helping from outside. The fort can keep its secret. I've heard it breathe, and that's enough for me. Story 9. I rent a small blue house on the east side of Salt Lake City. It's perfect for me and my orange cat Maple. The street feels quiet. The rent is fair, and the mountains in the distance look like a painted wall on the horizon. There's only one thing that disturbs me. My neighbor, the one in the duplex next door. Almost every night, he blasts music with heavy bass until 2 or 3 in the morning. The walls vibrate, the windows rattle, and even the dishes clink inside the cabinet. I tried everything. Earplugs, white noise apps, politely knocking on his door. He never answers. After a month without sleeping well, I decided to file a formal noise complaint on the city website. I hit submit and thought that would be the end of it. But the next morning, when I walked outside, I froze. All 4 tires on my Honda were completely flat, sliced cleanly along the sidewalls. Not a single one was spared. Replacing them, plus labor, drained my savings. The officer who took the report listened to my story. I mentioned the online complaint. He shrugged and told me, "We'll make a note. But remember, having a suspicion isn't the same as having proof." His words didn't calm my nerves. That same afternoon, I decided to try one more time. I went to my neighbor's door and knocked hard, determined to speak civilly. The music stopped for a few seconds. I waited. No one opened. I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my throat. And then the music came back on, louder than before. A week passed slowly. Every night I watched the street from the window and locked up with 3 bolts. On Tuesday, Maple didn't come back for dinner. I shook the food bag, walked the alley, called for him until midnight. Nothing. I put up posters, notified shelters, posted online. No trace. The house felt empty without his weight on the couch. 7 days after he disappeared, I opened my mailbox. There was a single envelope, no stamp, and no return address. Just my name written in clumsy, shaky letters. Inside was a short note. "Next time, it will be you." My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the paper. I called the police. 2 officers came, put the letter into a plastic evidence bag, and checked the yard. No fingerprints, no cameras, and no neighbor had seen anything. "Lock your house up tight and call if anything new happens," one of them said before they left. After that note, I couldn't feel calm anymore. I bought motion sensor lights, window alarms, and 3 cheap security cameras. The first night, my phone buzzed. Alert, movement in the backyard. I ran to check the footage. It was just a raccoon digging through the trash. The second night, nothing. Silence. But the third, at 2:14 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Motion detected. I opened the app, and the screen was black, no image. At dawn, I went outside to check. The camera was gone. The screws were still there, tight in the wall, as if someone had calmly unscrewed it and taken it. After that, I stopped sleeping in my bed. I started spending the nights on the couch with a baseball bat propped beside me. Every floor creak or gust of wind made me jump in fear. At work, I startled whenever someone laughed too loudly or dropped something. I started leaving lights on when I went out, so the house would look occupied. It was like fear had moved in with me. 2 weeks passed. One early morning, A dull thud woke me before dawn. It came from above, from the attic. I went up with my heart racing, pulling down the folding ladder. The flashlight trembled in my hand. The air was thick, full of dust floating in the beam. I moved slowly, and there, near the vent grill, I saw it. Maple's blue collar. The clasp was broken. There was no blood, no fur, just the collar. My legs gave out. I dropped to my knees on the dusty wood and cried until I couldn't breathe. I called the police again. They searched the house from top to bottom. No prints, no signs of forced entry. The detective, a kind man with a tired face, looked at me with sympathy and said, "We need a face on camera. Without that, there's not much we can do." I nodded, even though I could barely stand. That night, I installed a sturdier camera over the porch and replaced the one in the backyard. I also bought wooden boards and screwed them over the small basement windows. My landlord complained about how it looked. I didn't care. It was my life or aesthetics. One cloudy afternoon, coming home from work, I saw a white van parked in front of the duplex. My neighbor was in the doorway, laughing with two men unloading huge speakers. When he looked up and met my eyes, he smiled and slowly waved at me. A chill ran over my skin. I didn't wave back. I just got in my car and waited. That night, I sat in the car for 10 minutes, breathing deeply, not daring to go inside. Finally, I forced myself inside. I grabbed a notebook and wrote a list. Sell the house, move far away, get a second job if the rent is higher. Before going to sleep, I called 3 real estate agencies. Listings showed high demand in my area, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. But that same night, at 3:07 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Alert, porch camera. I opened the app. A figure stood just outside the reach of the light, only a dark silhouette. It raised a hand. In it, it held something small and shiny. A key. A knife. I don't know. Then it slowly stepped back until it disappeared. I saved the clip and sent it to the detective. At noon, he called me back. He was wearing a mask, he said, and the car had no visible plates. Useful, but not enough to get a warrant. That afternoon, I found a screwdriver under the doormat at my front door. I didn't touch it. I took photos, put on gloves, and sealed it in a bag. I added it to my evidence folder. The detective emailed back, "Thank you. Stay calm. We're staying alert." That's all. No promises. That night, I packed a bag and slept at a friend's house. The next morning, when I came back for my things, I saw fresh scratches near my door lock. I called my friend and asked for help putting the house up for sale. An investor bought it within a week without even visiting. I didn't hesitate for a second. I would never stay there again. I moved into a gated complex, with guards and cameras in every hallway. I'm trying to sleep better, though Maple never came back. The letter, the collar, the video, the screwdriver. Nothing led to an arrest. My file was shelved under a word that still haunts me. Inactive. Sometimes, when I check the mail, my hands still shake. When I hear music thumping through a wall, my throat tightens. Somewhere, there's a person who knows how to slash tires, steal a pet, and leave a threatening letter without making a sound. He knows my name. He knows I'm still afraid. And there are nights when everything is silent. When I swear I hear a Maple meowing far away, as if he's still waiting. Next time,